On March 31st, 1929, the air in New York City was crisp. Thousands of people lined Fifth Avenue for the annual Easter parade. It was a day of tradition, of conservative fashion, of societal order. But at a prearranged signal, something entirely unprecedented happened. 10 young society women stopped walking. They reached into their purses. They pulled out Lucky Strike cigarettes and lit them simultaneously. The press, who had been tipped off hours earlier, was waiting. The flashbulbs erupted. The smoke rose into the cold spring air. The next day, newspapers across the country published the photographs. They branded the event a bold strike for gender equality. The women called their cigarettes torches of freedom. To the public, it looked like a spontaneous, grassroots feminist protest against male domination. It was not. It was a completely manufactured psychological operation, and the world fell for it completely. What happened that day on Fifth Avenue proved something that would reshape the world. Human desire, rebellion, and identity could be engineered from the outside in. The mechanism deployed on those women in 1929 is still operating on you right now. But how do you actually convince a population to willingly consume something that harms them? How do you bypass the rational brain? To understand how your identity was commodified, we have to go back to the man who orchestrated that parade. His name was Edward Bernays, and he held a very specific biological advantage. He was the nephew of Sigmund Freud. Edward Bernays did not believe in marketing the features of a product. He believed that the masses were not rational actors. They were driven by unconscious, suppressed desires that could be mapped and triggered on command. In the late 1920s, the American Tobacco Company was hitting a financial ceiling. Their president, George Washington Hill, complained to Bernays that they were losing half of their potential market. Women simply were not smoking in public. It was considered a taboo, a moral failing, an act reserved for women of ill repute. Hill didn't want to change the cigarette. He wanted to change the American culture. He hired Bernays to do it. But how do you shatter a societal taboo without facing a massive backlash? Bernays didn't start by designing an advertisement. He started by consulting a psychoanalyst. He paid Dr. A. Brill to analyze exactly what cigarettes represented to the female subconscious. Brill's clinical conclusion was absolute. In the male-dominated society of the 1920s, cigarettes were viewed as a phallic symbol of male power and freedom. If women could be convinced that smoking was a direct challenge to male authority, Brill argued, they would smoke. Not for the taste, not for the nicotine, for the power. Bernays weaponized it. He hired wealthy debutantes, not actresses, to ensure the act was associated with aspiration, not scandal. He provided the media framing. He handed them the phrase, torches of freedom. He didn't sell a cigarette. He sold emancipation. Within weeks, the taboo was shattered. Women's smoking rooms opened in theaters across the country. Sales skyrocketed. A product that caused bad breath and stained teeth was successfully neurologically mapped to the concept of human freedom. But that's not the worst part. What happens when the product you so brilliantly sold to the world starts actively killing them? By the early 1950s, a mathematical crisis emerged for the industry. Medical data began linking smoking to an absolute epidemic of lung cancer. The statistical correlation was undeniable. In 1952, Reader's Digest published an article titled "Cancer by the Carton." Cigarette sales plummeted for the first time in decades. The entire industry faced an existential threat. But how does a multi-billion-dollar machine respond when its survival is threatened by scientific reality? In December 1953, the presidents of the 4 largest tobacco companies met secretly at the Plaza Hotel in New York City. These were bitter rivals who rarely even spoke to one another. They didn't meet to discuss making a safer cigarette. They met with a public relations firm, Hill and Knowlton, to discuss how to hack the American perception of risk. They realized a stark psychological truth. They didn't need to prove that cigarettes were safe. They only needed to manufacture doubt. Decades later, a famous internal memo from a tobacco executive stated this strategy explicitly. Doubt is our product, since it is the best means of competing with the body of fact that exists in the minds of the general public. On January 4th, 1954, the industry published a full-page ad called "A Frank Statement to Cigarette Smokers" in 448 newspapers across the United States. It reached an estimated 43 million people. The statement claimed that the tobacco industry accepted an interest in people's health as a basic responsibility. It announced the creation of the Tobacco Industry Research Committee. To the untrained eye, it looked like an act of corporate transparency. It was, in reality, a psychological shield. The committee didn't fund research to find a cure. It funded research designed to continuously raise questions. When a study linked smoking to cancer, they funded a counter-study on genetics or air pollution. The manufactured scientific debate gave every addicted consumer the psychological permission they desperately needed to keep buying. They didn't sell safety, they sold cognitive dissonance. Here is where the story goes from manipulative to highly calculated. While the public relations arm was manufacturing doubt in the press, the scientific arm of the tobacco industry was engaged in something else behind closed laboratory doors. They were not merely passive observers of a human habit, they were actively engineering a chemical dependency. In 1972, Claude Teague, a senior researcher at R.J. Reynolds, wrote a confidential internal memo that stripped away all the marketing illusions. He wrote, "The cigarette industry is not in the cigarette business. It is in the business of selling nicotine, an addictive drug." The industry understood that to maintain their revenue, they had to ensure the drug was delivered as efficiently as physically possible to the human brain. But how do you make an already addictive product impossible to put down? In the 1960s, scientists at Philip Morris discovered a loophole in human biology. By adding ammonia to the tobacco manufacturing process, they could alter the pH level of the smoke. This process freebased the nicotine. The ammonia chemistry allowed the nicotine molecules to bypass the blood-brain barrier in mere seconds. It delivered a rapid, intense, unnaturally sharp dopamine hit. It was a masterpiece of biochemical engineering. They weren't just manipulating culture anymore. They were physically hacking the human nervous system. The rugged, independent image of the Marlboro Man wasn't just a marketing campaign. He was the visual packaging for a highly optimized, chemically engineered dopamine trap. When a smoker tried to quit, they weren't just fighting a bad habit. They were fighting a meticulously calibrated neurochemical hook designed by some of the smartest, best-funded scientists on Earth. But what happens when your core demographic finally wakes up? As smoking rates among the wealthy began to fall, the industry didn't retreat. They resegmented. They went after the marginalized. Internal documents uncovered during massive litigation in the late 1990s revealed programs like Project Scum. This stood for Subculture Urban Marketing. It was a real R.J. Reynolds initiative, targeting the homeless and the LGBT community in San Francisco. They mapped impoverished neighborhoods. They placed billboards near homeless shelters. They ran targeted promotions inside communities devastated by the HIV epidemic. And then they fed those communities the exact chemical coping mechanism they had spent 30 years engineering. They didn't see human beings struggling to survive. They saw psychological stress vectors waiting to be monetized. In 2006, a federal judge ruled that the tobacco industry had deliberately deceived the American public for decades. The documents were finally unsealed. The internal memos, the secret meetings, the Project Scum files, all of it became public record. The industry paid billions in settlements. The executives kept their jobs, and the machine kept running. The machine that Edward Bernays helped build is still running. Right now, you can watch it operate in real time. Today, the tobacco industry has pivoted, not retreated, pivoted. British American Tobacco, Philip Morris and Altria, the same corporations that ran Project Scum, now manufacture vaping devices and flavored nicotine pouches. In 2015, Yule Labs launched a campaign that specifically targeted teenagers, running ads on Nickelodeon's website and visiting high schools to tell students their product was totally safe. By 2019, the CDC confirmed that 27.5% of American high school students were using e-cigarettes. That is 1 in 4. The ammonia trick from the 1960s became the nicotine salt formula of the 2010s. Different chemistry, identical purpose. Some things change. The underlying mechanism never does. But the legacy of the Plaza Hotel meeting goes far beyond nicotine. In 2021, A Facebook whistleblower named Frances Haugen leaked thousands of internal documents to the Wall Street Journal. Those documents showed that Meta's own researchers had concluded that Instagram was psychologically harmful to teenage girls, that it worsened body image, that it increased anxiety and depression. Meta's response was almost word for word the tobacco playbook. They disputed the science. They funded their own research. They published statements about their commitment to user well-being. In other words, doubt is their product too. When a fossil fuel conglomerate funds think tanks to debate the scientific consensus on climate change, they are using the strategy that Hill and Knowlton designed in a hotel room in 1953. The names change. The industry changes. The underlying architecture does not. Find the compulsion. Manufacture the identity around it. Suppress the science that threatens it. Monetize the dependency for as long as possible. They don't sell the product. They sell the emotion. They don't fight the science outright. They manufacture the doubt. They map your neurochemistry, segment your deepest insecurities, and sell you the temporary cure to a disease they deliberately infected you with. By the time you make a choice at the checkout counter or tap a button on your screen, you are not making a conscious decision. You are executing a script that was written for you in boardrooms you will never see. On March 31st, 1929, 10 young women lit a cigarette on Fifth Avenue. They thought they were holding a torch of freedom. They were actually just holding a lighter.